Welcome back to another episode of Let's Talk About Human Rights, the show where we explore the ideas, the people, and the stories that remind us of one simple truth. Every human being matters. I'm your host, Julz Allender, and I'm part of the California chapter of Youth for Human Rights International. Youth for Human Rights International is dedicated to educating people around the world about the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, a remarkable document adopted by the United Nations in 1948 that recognizes the inherent dignity and equal rights of every member of the human family. These rights belong to everyone, not because they are earned, not because they are granted by a government, but simply because we are human. And our hope is that through education, today's youth become tomorrow's leaders who understand these rights and protect them for everyone. Today's topic is different from many we've discussed before. Instead of looking at just one human right, today we're asking a much bigger question. What would happen if every nation on earth fully embraced the Universal Declaration of Human Rights? Not just signed it, not just acknowledged it, but truly taught it, protected it, and made it part of everyday life. Would our world look different? Would wars become less common? Would discrimination decrease? Would children grow up with greater opportunity? Would governments function differently? Those are the questions we'll explore today. When the Second World War ended in 1945, the world had witnessed destruction on a scale never before imagined. More than 60 million people had lost their lives. Entire cities had disappeared. Millions had been imprisoned, enslaved, or murdered simply because of who they were. People around the world recognized something profound. Peace alone was not enough. If humanity was ever going to prevent another catastrophe, people first had to agree on something much more fundamental. What does every human being deserve because simply they are human? That question led representatives from many nations, cultures, religions, and legal traditions to work together to create what became known as the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. On December 10, 1948, the United Nations General Assembly adopted this historic declaration. It contains 30 articles, 30 simple principles. Together they form perhaps the most ambitious vision for humanity ever written. Let's begin with the very first article, which states, "All human beings are born free and equal in dignity and rights. They are endowed with reason and conscience and should act toward one another in a spirit of brotherhood." Think about that. It doesn't say Americans, Canadians, Mexicans, Christians, Muslims, rich, poor, educated, uneducated. It simply says all human beings. That was revolutionary. For perhaps the first time in history, the international community attempted to define rights that belonged equally to everyone, no exceptions. The second article expands this idea. It states, "Everyone is entitled to all the rights and freedoms set forth in this declaration without distinction of any kind. Race, religion, language, political opinion, nationality, gender, economic status. None of these determine whether someone possesses human rights. Human rights are not earned, they are recognized. That distinction changes everything." Think for a moment about something almost every country already agrees upon. Gravity. No matter where you live, gravity works exactly the same. Whether you're standing in Tokyo, Nairobi, Buenos Aires, or Los Angeles, gravity doesn't change because a government says so. Human rights were designed with a similar philosophy, not because they're laws of nature, but because their authors believe that human dignity itself should transcend borders. Imagine crossing an international border and knowing, I may be entering another culture, another language, another legal system. But my worth as a human being remains exactly the same. That is an extraordinary idea. It says that governments may differ, cultures may differ, religions may differ, customs may differ, but dignity should not. Today, there are nearly 8 billion people living in almost 200 countries. Each has different histories, different political systems, different traditions, different priorities, yet parents everywhere tend to want remarkably similar things: safety, opportunity, education, healthcare, meaningful work, freedom to practice their beliefs, the ability to raise children without fear. These aren't uniquely American hopes or European hopes or African hopes. They're human hopes. The Universal Declaration attempts to recognize exactly that. When human rights are protected, remarkable things often happen. Children stay in school longer, communities become healthier, businesses invest with greater confidence, people are more willing to participate in civic life because they trust institutions. When rights are not protected, the opposite often occurs. Conflict increases, families flee violence, economic opportunity declines, communities become divided by fear and mistrust. Around the world today, we continue to see both stories unfolding. Some countries have strengthened protections for freedom of expression, access to education, and equal treatment under the law. Others continue to face armed conflict, political repression, discrimination, or humanitarian crisis that remind us of how fragile these rights can be. The Universal Declaration doesn't automatically solve these problems, but it gives the international community a common language for discussing them and a shared aspiration for improving people's lives. Perhaps the greatest strength of the Universal Declaration isn't that every nation follows it perfectly. It's that it gives humanity something incredibly valuable: a common standard, a common goal, a reminder that no matter where we're born, our humanity connects us first. So what would happen if every nation fully embraced the Universal Declaration of Human Rights? Earlier, we talked about where these rights come from. Now let's take a look at what happens when societies move closer towards protecting them, and what happens when they move away from them. Because human rights aren't just words on paper, they shape everyday life. Sometimes people hear the phrase human rights and imagine courtrooms, government buildings, or international organizations. But human rights are much closer to home than that. They influence whether a child receives an education, whether a family feels safe walking through their neighborhood, whether someone can peacefully express an opinion, whether people are treated fairly because of who they are, not because of what they look like or where they come from. The Universal Declaration isn't really about governments. It's about people. Article 3. Let's begin with one of the most recognizable articles, and it states, "Everyone has the right to life, liberty, and security of person." Notice something remarkable? It doesn't say some people. It doesn't say some citizens only. It doesn't say wealthy people. It simply says everyone. Imagine if every government measured every law, every policy, every decision against one simple question. Does this protect people's lives, liberty, and security? How different might our world look? Education is perhaps one of the greatest examples of human rights changing lives. And Article 26 begins by stating, everyone has the right to education. Education does something extraordinary. It gives people choices. Someone who learns to read can discover ideas from every culture. Someone who learns mathematics can become an engineer, a scientist, an entrepreneur, a doctor. Education doesn't merely prepare people for employment, it prepares them for freedom. Throughout history, societies that expanded access to education often experienced increases in literacy, innovation, civic participation, and economic opportunity. At the same time, millions of children around the world still face barriers to education because of conflict, poverty, displacement, or discrimination. International organizations continue to work with governments and local communities to improve access, but significant gaps remain in many regions. Every child who gains access to education gains opportunities that can influence generations to come. Another remarkable human right appears in Article 18, and it says, "Everyone has the right to freedom of thought, conscience, and religion." Think about how extraordinary that statement is. It recognizes something no government can truly control: your thoughts, your conscience, your beliefs. Human history has shown us what can happen when people are punished simply for believing differently. Communities become divided, fear replaces dialogue, innovation slows, trust disappears, but when people are free to think, to question, to discuss respectfully, societies often become stronger. Not because everyone agrees, but because people can peacefully disagree. And Article 19 continues this idea, and it states, "Everyone has the right to freedom of opinion and expression." That doesn't mean every opinion is correct. It means people should be able to express ideas without fearing punishment solely because they hold a different viewpoint. Healthy societies depend upon conversation, learning, questioning, listening. Progress almost always begins with someone asking, "What if we did things differently?" Imagine traveling anywhere in the world knowing your dignity should be respected, your children could attend school, your family would be protected equally under the law, your religion or lack of religion would be protected, your opinions could be expressed peacefully. This doesn't erase differences between cultures. It protects the people within those cultures. The Universal Declaration doesn't ask countries to become identical. It asks them to recognize something shared: our humanity. Before discussing some of the challenges our world continues to face, let's remember something important. Human rights are advancing in many places. Progress may not always happen quickly, but it does happen. Here are just a few examples. Here are just a few encouraging examples. Expanding education around the world. Governments and nonprofit organizations continue expanding educational opportunities for children in underserved communities. In many regions, new schools, digital learning initiatives, and scholarship programs are helping students, especially girls and displaced children, remain in school despite significant challenges. Every child who learns to read, every student who graduates, represents another step toward protecting human rights. And in other good news, across numerous countries, law enforcement agencies, nonprofit organizations, and survivors are working together to combat human trafficking. New technology is helping investigators identify trafficking networks more quickly. Public awareness campaigns are teaching young people how traffickers operate, and communities are becoming better equipped to recognize warning signs and support survivors. Every life restored, every child protected is a reminder that ordinary people can make extraordinary differences. And in more good news, perhaps the most encouraging news comes from young people themselves. Students around the world are creating human rights clubs, organizing service projects, combating bullying, promoting inclusion, and educating their classmates about the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. Many of tomorrow's leaders are already leading today. And looking at the challenges, of course, our work isn't finished. Around the globe today, millions continue to experience armed conflict, forced displacement, religious persecution, human trafficking, modern slavery, discrimination, poverty, and violations of fundamental freedoms. These aren't simply political issues. They're human issues. Behind every statistic is a family, a child, a dream, a life. And that's why human rights matter. Because every number has a name. Every headline represents someone's life. So what can one person actually do? Can education really change an entire generation? Can learning about human rights reduce violence? Can understanding dignity change the future? We'll explore why human rights education may be one of the most powerful investments we can make, not just for ourselves, but for future generations around the world. Throughout today's episode, we've explored an idea that at first glance seems incredibly simple. Every person deserves to be treated with dignity. Yet history has shown us that putting that simple idea into practice is one of humanity's greatest challenges. The Universal Declaration of Human Rights wasn't written because the world had become peaceful. It was written because the world had witnessed what happens when human dignity is ignored. The Declaration is not a guarantee that injustice will never happen again. Rather, it is a reminder, a shared standard against which people, institutions, and governments can measure their actions. And today, instead of interviewing a single guest, I'd like to invite all of us into the conversation. Because this episode isn't really about governments, it's about us. When we think about changing the world, our minds often jump to presidents, prime ministers, the United Nations, or international courts. Those institutions certainly matter, but history reminds us that many of society's greatest changes begin with ordinary people: teachers, parents, students, neighbors, volunteers, journalists, doctors, business owners. People who simply decide that another human being deserves to be treated with dignity. Human rights don't begin in courtrooms. They begin in conversations. Imagine if every child grew up knowing all 30 human rights. Imagine if every school taught not only mathematics and science, but also respect, responsibility, compassion, critical thinking. Imagine if every young person understood that they possessed dignity and that every other person possessed that same dignity. How might social media look? How might our schools change? How might neighborhoods change? Would disagreements disappear? Probably not. Human rights do not eliminate differences. They teach us how to navigate those differences peacefully. Sometimes people ask, if everyone has rights, what about responsibilities? Well, that's an excellent question. Rights and responsibilities go hand in hand. And Article 29 reminds us, and it states, everyone has duties to the community in which alone the free and full development of his personality is possible. Think about that. Human rights aren't simply about demanding something for ourselves. They're also about protecting those same rights for others. Freedom of speech comes with the responsibility to engage respectfully. Freedom of religion comes with respecting another person's freedom to believe differently. The right to security means driving responsibly, following laws that protect everyone, and respecting our neighbors. Human rights flourishes when responsibility flourishes. Have you ever dropped a stone into a still lake? One small splash creates ripples that spread far beyond where the stone entered the water. Kindness works that way. Respect works that way. Education works that way. Human rights works that way. One teacher inspires 30 students. Those students influence hundreds of friends, and those friends become parents, business leaders, police officers, scientists, artists, judges, coaches. Every person carries those ideas forward. Sometimes changing the world doesn't begin with changing millions. Sometimes it begins with changing one. Today, people in every corner of the world continue working to protect human rights. Teachers introducing the Universal Declaration into classrooms, journalists risking their safety to report the truth, doctors caring for people regardless of nationality, volunteers assisting refugees, organizations combating human trafficking, communities working to reduce discrimination, parents teaching empathy around the dinner table. These stories don't always make international headlines, but together they are writing a different story about humanity, one of hope. Let's return to the question we asked at the beginning of today's program. What if every country fully embraced the Universal Declaration of Human Rights? Would there still be disagreements? Certainly. Would cultures remain different? Absolutely. Would governments still debate policies? Of course. Human rights were never intended to erase diversity. They were designed to protect it. Imagine a world where every disagreement began with one shared understanding. I may disagree with you, but your dignity remains intact. What a remarkable place that would be. One of my favorite things about hosting this program is meeting people from every imaginable background. Different careers, different beliefs, different cultures, different experiences, and yet I continually discover something remarkable. Almost everyone wants the same thing: to be safe, to be heard, to love their family, to pursue meaningful work, to belong, to contribute, to leave the world a little better than they found it. Perhaps that shouldn't surprise us, because the Universal Declaration begins from exactly that assumption, that beneath all of our differences, we are first and foremost human. So I'd like to leave you with a challenge. This week, read just one article of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. Talk about it with your family. Ask your children what they think it means. Discuss it with a friend, share it with a coworker. Ask yourself, how can I better protect this right, not only for myself, but for someone else? Change rarely begins with governments. More often, it begins with conversations like these. I'd like to close today by returning you to the very first words of the Universal Declaration, words written nearly 80 years ago, yet just as meaningful today. And I quote, "All human beings are born free and equal in dignity and rights. Not some, not most, all." Imagine if every child believed that. Imagine if every leader remembered that. Imagine if every community lived that. Perhaps the Universal Declaration is more than a document. Perhaps it is humanity's shared promise to one another, one that each generation has the opportunity and the responsibility to carry forward. Before we leave you today, I'd like to invite you to watch one more video. Throughout this episode, we've talked about what human rights are, why they matter, and what our world could look like if every nation truly embraced them. But where did these ideas come from? Who first imagined that every person, regardless of nationality, race, religion, or background, should be recognized as equal in dignity and rights? How did one of the most influential documents in modern history come to be? The answers are found in the remarkable journey behind the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. And as you watch, I encourage you to think about something. The Declaration didn't appear overnight. It was written by people from different nations, different cultures, different religions, and different political systems who choose to focus on what united humanity instead of what divided it. The spirit of cooperation remains just as important today. The story you're about to see reminds us that human rights are not simply ideals written on paper. They are principles that continue to shape lives, inspire movements, and give hope to millions of people around the world. Here's the story of human rights.
Human rights is, geez, that's a good question.
Human rights. Well, that's a tough one.
Wow.
I don't even know how to give that a definition.
I would probably have to do a little bit of homework or something.
Yeah, any right that I think just as a normal, human,
The rights that humans have?
Oh, that's a very large debate.
Tú le puedes preguntar a 20 personas y te van a dar 20 diferentes opiniones.
Non saprei, è una domanda complicatissima.
Yes, we just take them for granted that they're there, but we don't even consider what they are.
حقوق بشر حقوقی که به شما تعلق داره صرفاً به خاطر اینکه بشر هستید. شیوهی که طبیعتاً انتظار دارید با شما رفتار بشه و سزاوارش هستید، مثل حق آزاد زیستن، حق بیان عقیده و حق برابری با دیگران. حقوق زیادی وجود دارند و بیشترشون متعلق به گروه‌های خاصی هستند. اما حقوق بشر تنها حقوقیه که قطعاً در همه جا و در مورد همه صدق میکنه. یعنی بچه‌ها، پیرا، فقیرا، بازیکن‌های بسکتبال، کارگرا، خواننده‌های رپ، معلم‌ها، آفریقایی‌ها، سرخپوستا، آلبانی‌ها، مسیحی‌ها، مسلمونا، یهودی‌ها، بیدینا، مادرتون، پدرتون، همسایه‌تون و شما همگی دقیقاً حقوق یکسانی دارید. به عبارت دیگه این حقوق جهانیه. اما این سوال هنوز باقی میمونه. این حقوق چی هستن؟
Name the human rights?
What the human rights are?
The right to live.
Equality between all peoples.
Right to religion, the right to...
Is there supposed to be a list somewhere I should be aware of?
بنابر منشور سازمان ملل در مجموع حقوق بشر شامل 30 مورده که معمولاً با همدیگه و به سادگی حقوق بشر گفته میشن. این حقوق همگی در اعلامیه جهانی حقوق بشر که در این زمینه معتبرترین سند دنیاست لیست شدن. اما خیلی طول کشیده تا به اینجا برسیم. در ابتدا اصلاً حقوق بشری وجود نداشت. اگه عضو گروه خاصی بودید، امنیت داشتید. وگرنه خب نداشتید. اما بعد شخصی به نام کوروش کبیر تصمیم گرفت کل این شرایط رو عوض کنه. اون بعد از پیروزی بر بابل دست به عملی کاملاً انقلابی زد. اعلام کرد همه برده‌ها آزادن که برن. علاوه بر این گفت که مردم در انتخاب مذهب خود آزاد هستند، صرف نظر از اینکه عضو چه گروهی باشن. مردم گفته‌های اونو بر لوحی سفالی که به استوانه کوروش شناخته شده ثبت کردند و به همین سادگی حقوق بشر شکل گرفت. این ایده به سرعت در یونان، هندوستان و سرانجام در روم گسترش پیدا کرد. اونا متوجه شدن که مردم طبیعتاً از قوانین خاصی پیروی میکنن، حتی اگه بهشون چنین چیزی گفته نشده باشه. اینا رو قوانین طبیعی نامیدن. اما کسایی که قدرت در دستشون بود مرتب این قوانین رو زیر پا میذاشتن. 1000 سال گذشت تا بالاخره در انگلستان پادشاهی اومد که قبول کرد هیچ کس نمیتونه حقوق مردم رو زیر پا بذاره، حتی یه پادشاه. بالاخره حقوق مردم به رسمیت شناخته شد و دیگه اونا از دست صاحبان قدرت در امان بودن. البته تا حدی. تا وقتی که یه عده شورشی انگلیسی استقلال خودشون رو اعلام نکردن، پادشاه اینو قبول نکرده بود که همه آدما برابر آفریده شدن. البته نمیشه گفت که اون با این ایده موافق بود، ولی نمیتونست جلوشون رو بگیره و اینجوری بود که آمریکا به وجود اومد. فرانسوی‌ها بلافاصله برای حقوق خودشون انقلاب کردند. لیست اونا حتی طولانی‌تر بود و اصرار داشتن که این قوانین ساختگی نیستن، طبیعی‌اند. چیزی که مردم روم قوانین طبیعی می‌دونستن، تبدیل به حقوق طبیعی شد. متاسفانه همه از این موضوع چندان خوشحال نشدن. در فرانسه ژنرالی به اسم ناپلئون تصمیم گرفت که دموکراسی جدید فرانسه رو سرنگون کنه و خودش امپراتور اعلام کنه، امپراتور دنیا، و تقریباً هم موفق شد. ولی کشورهای اروپایی با هم متحد شدن و اونو شکست دادن. حقوق بشر دوباره موضوع داغ روز شد. قراردادهای بین‌المللی بسته شدن و در سرتاسر اروپا حقوق بسیاری به مردم تعلق گرفت. ولی فقط در اروپا. سایر نقاط دنیا هنوز نه تنها به نوعی از این حقوق محروم بودند، بلکه از طرف امپراتوری‌های بزرگ اروپا مورد تهاجم، تسخیر و بهره‌کشی قرار گرفتند. اما بعد وکیل جوانی از هندوستان تصمیم گرفت که این شرایط باید خاتمه پیدا کنه. اسمش مهاتما گاندی بود و علیرغم خشونتی که باش مواجه بود اصرار داشت که همه مردم دنیا حقوقی دارن، نه فقط مردم اروپا. و بالاخره حتی اروپایی هم کم کم با اون موافقت کردن. البته به این سادگی هم نبود. 2 جنگ جهانی اتفاق افتاد. هیتلر نیمی از یهودی‌ها رو در اردوگاه‌های مرگبار و وحشتناک نازی‌ها از بین برد. روی هم رفته 90 میلیون نفر کشته شدند. حقوق بشر هیچ وقت تا این اندازه به مرز نابودی نزدیک نشده بود و دنیا هیچ وقت به این شدت نیاز به تغییر نداشت. به این طریق کشورهای دنیا با هم متحد شدند و سازمان ملل رو تأسیس کردند. هدف اصلی اونا تاکید دوباره بر ایمان به حقوق اساسی بشر، کرامت و ارزش شخص انسان بود. ولی حقوق بشر چی بودند؟ بیانیه کوروش کبیر، قوانین طبیعی روم یا اعلامیه فرانسه؟ به نظر میرسی که عقیده‌های مردم یکم با هم فرق میکرد که حقوق بشر چی باید باشه. اما زیر نظر النور روزولت بالاخره همه با مجموعه‌ای از حقوق که بدون استثنا در مورد تمام انسان‌ها صدق میکرد موافقت کردند. اعلامیه جهانی حقوق بشر. چیزی که فرانسوی حقوق طبیعی میدونستن بالاخره تبدیل به حقوق بشر شد. پس به طور خلاصه اولش فقط تعداد کمی از مردم که خوششانس بودن یه حقایی داشتن، تا اینکه یک از اونا تصمیم گرفت و گفت آدمای دیگه هم باید یه حقایی داشته باشن، که خیلی خوب بود. ولی همه موافق نبودن و فقط یه چندین هزار سال جنگ و بیانیه تصویب کردن و جنگ‌های بیشتر لازم بود تا بالاخره همه قبول کنن حقوق بشر به همه تعلق داره. و از اون به بعد همه به خوبی و خوشی زندگی کردن. فقط یه مشکل کوچیک وجود داشت. اگه مردم حق غذا و سرپناه دارن، چرا هر روز 16,000 بچه از گرسنگی میمیرن؟ هر 5 ثانیه یکی. اگه مردم آزادی بیان دارن، چرا هزاران نفر به خاطر ابراز عقیدهشون تو زندونا هستن؟ اگه مردم حق دارن تحصیل کنن، چرا بیشتر از 1 میلیارد بزرگسال سواد خوندن ندارن؟ اگه بردهداری واقعا از بین رفته، چرا در حال حاضر هنوز 27 میلیون برده داریم؟ بیشتر از 2 برابر تعداد برده‌ها در سال 1800 میلادی. واقعیت اینه، وقتی که اعلامیه جهانی حقوق بشر امضا شد، رعایت کردنش قانوناً اجباری نبود، بلکه اختیاری بود. و علیرغم وجود تعداد زیادی اسناد، توافقنامه‌ها، قراردادها و قانون‌های دیگه، این حقوق هنوز چیزی بیشتر از کلمات نوشته شده روی کاغذ نیستن. پس سوال اینه، چه کسی این کلمه‌ها رو تبدیل به واقعیت میکنه؟ وقتی دکتر لوترکینگ برای برابری نژادی راهپیمایی کرد، برای حقوقی که نزدیک به 2 دهه قبل سازمان ملل تضمین کرده بود راهپیمایی کرد، ولی هنوز راهپیمایی کرد. وقتی در دهه 1980 نلسون ماندلا برای عدالت اجتماعی قیام کرد، تقریباً 40 سال بود که کشورش با از بین بردن چنین تبعیضاتی موافقت کرده بود، اما هنوز جنگید. اونایی که امروز در برابر شکنجه، فقر و تبعیض می‌جنگن، انسان‌های قوی هیکل یا ابرقهرمان نیستن. اونا مردمن. بچه‌ها، مادرها، پدرها، معلم‌ها و آزاداندیشانی که از سکوت خودداری میکنن. کسایی هستن که فهمیدن حقوق بشر یه درس تاریخ یا کلمات نوشته شده روی کاغذ نیست. حقوق بشر سخنرانی، آگهی بازرگانی یا تبلیغات گسترده نیست، بلکه تصمیماتی هستن که ما هر روز به عنوان یک انسان میگیریم. اونا مسئولیتایی هستن که همه ما باید به عهده بگیریم. احترام گذاشتن به هم، کمک کردن به هم و حمایت از نیازمندان. همونطور که النور روزولت گفت، حقوق جهانی بشر اصلا از کجا شروع میشه؟ از جاهای کوچیک، نزدیک به خونه، اونقدر نزدیک و اونقدر کوچیک که در هیچ نقشه از دنیا نمیشه پیداشون کرد. ولی اونا هنوز دنیای خود فرد هستن. محله که توش زندگی میکنه، مدرسه یا دانشگاهش، کارخونه، مزرعه یا دفتری که توش کار میکنه. جاهایی که توی اونا هر مرد و زن و کودکی خواهان برابری در مقابل قانون، برابری در فرصت‌های کاری و برابری ارزش انسان‌ها بدون تبعیض هستند. اگه این قوانین در این جاها مفهومی نداشته باشن، در هیچ جای دیگه هم مفهومی نخواهند داشت.